everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of the Pixar Post Podcast. I'm TJ.
And I'm Julie.
And we are excited to wrap up the Monsters University press event three-part series that we have been into now. And now it's part 3. It's sad. It's the end of an era.
Yeah.
But yet at the same point, it's only sad because I want to hear more of this and I want to talk about more of this myself. So I can't wait for hopefully next year, if we're invited, we get to go back and get some more of this, because the information, the insights, the details are just so fabulous. It's outstanding.
Right.
And like we've heard, everybody's been, loving the podcast. They've been saying, this is so great. We love all the details, and all the effort that you guys are putting into it. So hopefully you guys like part 3. Again, part 1, we talked about the world of Monsters University. Part 2, we talked about the characters. So if you haven't listened to those, you don't have to listen to them in any particular order, but you'll want to listen to those. This one's more of the technical elements, talking to producers and global illumination, and then a little bit of background from Saschka Unseld in regards to the Blue Umbrella. And a little bit
with Peter Sohn,
who voiced Squishy in the movie.
Yep.
So we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff, so let's get into it. So what are some of the other things we're going to talk about? There's been a ton of Monsters University clips and trailers that have come out. I mean, there's at least 6 of them that have come out since our last episode.
Yeah. And you know what? It's funny. Brave did the same thing.
Right, it definitely starts to ratchet up.
That month, I believe there's only 24 days right now.
Right.
Before the release, the actual, release of the film, and it's just like...
Yeah, taken off.
Yeah, trailer overload, which is wonderful because it's great to see all these little snippets. It does make everyone... We've been lucky enough to see an advanced screening, but it's been... for our friends who have not seen it, they're like, oh my gosh.
Right, it's really
these
pumping
trailers
people
are
up.
killing us.
Right. So what else are we going to talk about this week? We're going to talk about the Monsters University partnership with Lowe's. We're going to talk about the Monsters University Vinylmation that are going to be coming out. But first, we want to kick off with a little bit of talk real quickly about Disney Infinity. They released some new Monsters University playset details, and it's so cool that you can see more of the world of Monsters University. They released a whole, I think it's like over a minute trailer, so you can get a lot of good, looks at Fear Tech and other things like that. And then we can now also see Randall in action, as well as some of the other sub-characters. You're not going to be able to play as the characters from the rest of the Uzma Kappa fraternity.
Right,
but it's cool to see them in the background, so that's always cool. And then it's also really cool that Disney Infinity also released a trailer showing Lightning McQueen, the racing mode of the Toy Box mode, and showing Lightning McQueen racing Dash from The Incredibles. Really cool to think that you could race a car and a person. And then, the trailer goes into all this other really cool stuff where it shows Elastigirl using one of those sticky hands that you would, slap on something and pull it towards you.
Yeah,
she slaps it on
stuff that you used as a kid that you got from the 25-cent gumball thing at the,
Right.
When you left the grocery store.
Right, yeah, she smacks it on a post and pulls herself really fast towards it. It's really cool. So definitely check those out if you haven't seen them. So let's talk a little bit about the Monsters University Vinylmation. Okay, so originally, when that set was first announced, we talked about it on the podcast, and we thought it was going to be coming out in April.
Yeah, we did think it was going to come out sooner, and actually the photos that we saw, I think, probably weren't supposed to be released.
Well, of course they weren't supposed to have been released.
As early as they were, because it shows the brothers Terry and Terry Perry. And in our latest post, Terry and Terry Perry were omitted from the whole collection photo, which has us thinking that they are the exclusive chaser.
Right, because there's always one that's hidden that you don't know what it is until somebody opens it up and starts talking about it. But obviously it seems like that's what it would be.
We don't have confirmation, obviously, but, it would seem kind of silly if...
Yeah, he's the only one that's missing from the Uzma Kappa fraternity.
They are. They're they're brothers.
You're right.
Yeah,
You're right.
Just, if they were the only two, because they are Uzma Kappa brothers, it has to be them.
Right. So originally we thought it was coming out in April based on the date that was written on the bags in that original picture, but now we know it's June 14th. But for people in California, there's a cool little opportunity.
Not in California. It's in Disney World. It's in Orlando.
You're right. In Orlando at the D Street store.
Yep.
Between 5 and 7 p.m. Eastern Time, there were two designers that pulled together these Monsters University Series 1 Vinylmation. And one of the artists, Ron Cohey, is going to be autographing at that the D Street store.
Yep,
so
which is located in downtown Disney.
Right. So the other designer is Thomas Scott. He won't be there autographing, but definitely very cool that there's going to be a little a session there on the date that they're released officially.
Yeah.
So if you're out there and...
if you're a Vinylmation fan and happen to be in, Orlando, California,
now we're all screwed up.
Orlando, Florida, be sure to check that out because that sounds really exciting.
Now, the other cool thing to talk about with that is that they have noted in quotation marks that it's Series 1.
Yes.
So it makes me think if this takes off, they would have already have to have had them designed at this point if they are expecting a Series 2. So that could be really cool. Obviously we know the majority of this one is the Uzma Kappa House and some of the other key players, but now they could, dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, to like Dean Hardscrabble.
Right. Oh, she would totally be the chaser, I think.
Yeah. There's a couple other different characters, maybe a couple of the professors, maybe a couple of the other students that weren't such big key players, but, just kind of fun.
Right.
So yeah, that'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
If there is a Series 2, I like the fact that they're talking about Series 1. Makes me think there's more.
Right.
So we talked about some of the trailers that are going to be coming out, but there was also a commercial for Swiffer as well as for Lowe's this week or last week and a half. And just a quick note about the Lowe's commercial: it's a partnership that they did that they're trying to get kids into the store to get their hands on some building projects.
Yeah, just to kind of just like you said, projects to build with mom and dad in the store. Really interesting, fun things for kids to do. I think there is an age range, for each project.
Right. So if you link through from our post, you'll be able to see some more details. But what's cool is that originally in the commercial, they only talk about, because of course they want to keep it geared towards Monsters University, is they only show a series of Mike and Sully door hangers and then a Monsters University like wooden chest, like a treasure chest or storage chest kind of thing. But what we just found out and we just saw is that they're going to continue that Pixar theme, and in July they're going to be doing
throughout the summer.
Right, throughout the summer, and I guess leading into fall, but that's not necessarily. Yeah. But regardless, there's the Pizza Planet truck and RC, the character from Toy Story. So that's going to be pretty cool too. So the Pizza Planet truck, that's going to be an awesome one.
That will be a really cool one.
We're going to have to find some... we're going to bring our nephews probably.
Yes.
And, be out there for sure because we got to check this out and see how these go. So, and then of the other Monsters University trailers, we're not going to go through and talk about each one of them in depth, but as we mentioned, there was the Lowe's commercial, the Swiffer commercial. There was a little toolkit that shows Squishy's mom playing hacky sack, or kind of taking over playing hacky sack with Mike and Sully, and really kind of schools them.
Yeah, showing them up.
Right. Yeah, so that was kind of cute. So they've released a whole bunch of those toolkits for Brave, so we don't know. Well, they didn't really release them. They were out there. So we don't know if any more of those are going to be coming from Monsters University, but if they are, of course, we'll be uploading them to the site. So, and then my favorite that has been released is one called It All Began Here, that trailer, and it's shows all the great party and action elements of the film. It makes you think that it's like straight action all the time. Don't let it detract from the fact that there is still a lot of heart and great story behind it, but it's awesome. I can't get enough of it. I watched it, I don't even know how many times in a row, just because that song Roar that's in it, the one that they're like in the club, the club beat to, is just so awesome. It matches perfectly. You
really have, I think, worn that trailer out. You've watched it so many times.
I know, I can't wait. I can't wait to see it again just so I can see that. So then the other one that was really cool was called First Morning. And I love that scene where it's, their first day waking up in the Uzma Kappa fraternity, and Mike is cuddling or holding and caressing Sully's hand and says, "I know you're a princess and I'm just a stable boy." And he starts kissing his hand. Sully falls off the bed and yells, "Mom." It's just classic.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Great animation. The shedding.
Great kind of slapstick kind of comedy.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one was a great one too. And then the last one that came out, well, there's another one too, but Acceptance Letter. It's a spot that shows clips of the excitement of getting accepted to college, the new beginnings it brings, the friends that you'll make. Obviously, even if you didn't experience all that, it still is just like, it's a good heartwarming one.
You know what? That one was a real, just like you said, heartwarming, heartfelt. It was just, wow, gosh, this is like a college movie. You get that experience like right before you get to college, before all the parties, before all the fun. You just get that accomplishment feeling like I got accepted.
Right.
That you
did something.
You feel accomplished, and that's exactly what this trailer, job well done, because it did it.
Right. So then the new one that's also coming out, in fact, we haven't even posted on it yet, but it was uploaded to Walt Disney Studios New Zealand site, is one about Mike and Sully integrating a little deeper into the Uzma Kappa house. We're not going to say too much because it is a spoiler one. We were pretty surprised. It's not a massive scene, but it still was like a woo, okay. So anyways, there we go. So that's the trailers that have come out. That is a huge list.
Yeah,
so
lots of trailers.
So what else is to come?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to say what else they could really add into different trailers. Like you said, I kind of hope there's more toolbox ones.
Right, just little snippets.
Yeah, well, they're just kind of fun with just playing with the characters against that white background.
Right, and they don't even relate to the movie, really. It's just about exploring the characters, how they move, how they interact, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're usually just kind of goofy, so I hope more of those come out.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then we should also note that, for our next episode, definitely tune into that, because as we're talking about all these seeing the movies and all those kind of things, we're going to be going to another screening of Monsters University tomorrow, hopefully having some opportunity to chat with Dan Scanlon. And then, like we've been hinting all week, we're going to be talking about an upcoming contest as well. But let's get down to the real meat and potatoes of this episode, what everybody's been waiting for. At least what I've been waiting for.
Yes.
Part 3 of 3 of the Monsters University Press Day. So like we said, we've already summarized the world of Monsters University, the characters. Let's get into some of the technical elements. So today, the first thing that we're going to talk about is global illumination. It's a class that was called Physics 250 with Jean-Claude Kalash, who's the director of photography for lighting. Sanjay Bakshi, who's the supervising technical director, and Christine Wagoner, who was the simulation supervisor.
Yes.
So in this one, we've kind of described in all the other sessions what kind of room it was. So talk about this room, how many people were there.
It was still our small group, and it was in like a larger theater setting, kind of a bigger screen, larger, more seating, but definitely this class was the heaviest on the technical side.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
You could kind of tell that some people were just like, I am feeling very overwhelmed listening to this information.
Yeah.
I sat there and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're sharing this information with us. Mm-hmm. I felt like an insider. I was like, I can't believe, like...
Right.
It's their new technology. Global illumination is brand new for Pixar, which they just came up with. But it's just like, all these different lights that they had to create. But I was just like, I can't believe they're telling us this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff, really in-depth. So as we go, as you listen to the audio, there's tons of facts and numbers as we talked about. We'll recap them afterwards. There's lots of amazing insight into lighting, how the workflow goes. And again, I also just want to mention, as we've mentioned on previous episodes, that they do talk and reference a lot of images on the screen, but you're still definitely going to want to listen to it. You gain a lot of amazing insight into the process that Pixar takes when working on a film as they describe who works on what. So we'll pick back up after this, but it's about a 20-minute clip, so get ready.
That's basically the people who work on the technical aspects of the film. These are two departments, crowds and sets. There's over 100 of us who worked on the film, and we're in departments such as layout, sets, characters, sim, rendering, visual effects. One of the crown jewels of Monsters University is the School of Rendering. These are the folks who are responsible for actually making the pixels that show up on the screen when you watch the film. JC is going to talk about global illumination, which is a challenge we took on this film, which really opened up the possibilities for lighting creatively, as well as simplified the lighting setups. But the cost was an increased kind of rendering capacity. So Pixar had to double its render farm to make Monsters University, which basically means that there's a room, the render farm is a room full of computers, and now there's double the number of computers in that room. It took over 100 million CPU hours to render Monsters University, which is a record for Pixar. Another way to look at that is if you were to buy a computer today and start rendering Monsters University, in about 10,000 years you'd have the film finished. Thankfully, we have many, many computers. It only took a couple years. The record for Pixar, each frame, there's 24 frames a second. Each one takes about 29 hours. The other crown jewel of Monsters University is the School of Characters. These are the people responsible for building the characters. And we had lots of fun making all these BG characters. We call them BG, background characters, or extras in a live action kind of terminology. Basically to populate the campus. It has to be rich. It's a successful school. There's lots of people who go to this school, and we wanted to make a really interesting, diverse population, and respecting the kind of rules of what monsters look like from Monsters Incorporated. So this was a fun job. We built over 400 characters just to populate the campus, and on average, this is a Pixar record. We have about 25 characters in every shot. Traditionally, we've had less than 10 in every shot. So the frame is full of these wonderful characters. I'm going to hand it over to Christine to talk about some simulation stuff.
Good morning, Professor Wagner, aka Simulation Supervisor. I'm showing here the canonical waving flag example of simulation, which is on the Scare School, and we have a beautiful image of our campus. What is simulation? Simulation is motion calculated by software that's too complex to be animated by hand or in a manual fashion. As an example, Sullivan has too many hairs to draw by hand and to manage on a frame-by-frame basis. Folds in clothing are too complex to be animated by hand in a temporally coherent way. This is a university. There's lots of books. So books have too many pages in them to animate by hand. Simulation challenges in general at Pixar and also for Monsters University. Simulation is ubiquitous in many of our films. In Monsters University, we simulated 89% of the film. One of the major goals for simulation that we have is naturalistic motion. When you're watching a live action movie, you really don't think about the clothing on the actors, and we want the same. If you don't notice it, we've done our job. Some examples of assets the types of assets that we simulated: hair, cloth, grass, trees, books, paper, bags, and so on. There's as Sanjay noted, there's a large variety of characters, and we are also simulating cartoon physics, and there are very extreme proportions on the characters, so it makes a difficult tailoring problem. Here's Sullivan. This is an example of Sullivan in the shot and how his data is represented to the simulator. Those are a subset of hairs that we call key hairs, and then the rendered hairs are called in-between hairs. He has a simplified version of his t-shirt on, which is a triangulated mesh, and there are some collision objects in the scene, which are the ground, his own body, a simplified version of his body, and the door. This is an overlay of the simulation data versus the final rendered image to give you an idea of the differences in the representation. Here's the final rendered image. Taking the same shot, let's look at a shot progression of how this simulation progresses throughout the production. So here is layout. There's no simulation. We're just assessing the shot to get an idea of what's going on. Here is an unusual thing. It's simulation on layout animation. So we're testing the asset in the scene. We can see that Sullivan's shirt is broken. His arms are not in the sleeves, and so we know we'll have to fix something. This is in progress animation. The simulation's still broken. The mobile is still manually animated. This is approved animation. There's no simulation in this render, but animation is happy with the performance of Sullivan. This is the approved simulation. We fully simulated the mobile. All the contact with the door and the floor is correct. We like the folds in Sullivan's shirt and the motion of his fur. We then assess all the shots with full shading before they go to lighting to find any errors that might appear when you apply shading. Then this is the final rendered image, and again, the simulation can look different in the final render than we saw it before. Monsters Inc. versus Monsters University. I had the privilege of working on Monsters Inc. There was a limitation, which was that only one hairy character could appear in the frame in general in most shots. There might have been a couple shots with maybe two. Versus in Monsters University, 25% of the characters have hair. In Monsters Inc., there was only one simulated garment, and that was Boo's t-shirt, versus the 127 garments that we built for Monsters University. There was also an avoidance that impacted performance in some cases of limited contact in Monsters Inc., where there was perhaps not a lot of hugging or interaction of holding objects and things like that, just to make sure that we didn't spend too much time on those situations previously, versus in Monsters University we have lots of contact, and just in general a lot more instances of simulation. Some fun facts: clothing in the Monsters world is a symbol for the fraternities and sororities, and also for the characters in positions of authority. The first version of Pixar's hair and cloth simulator was deployed on Monsters Inc. The first major rewrite of that simulator happened for Monsters University. If you are wondering, Sullivan has 5.5 million rendered hairs, which is about a 5-fold increase. Some simulation highlights. This is a shot where we did a complex vegetation simulation of the trees. We simulated the banners, the motion of the frisbee, or the motion of the wind of the frisbee, and we even simulated the keychain on the backpack. The backpack itself was also fully simulated. Here, this is a more subtle example. You would notice if we hadn't simulated the grass interaction, but it's just adding to the overall texture of the shot and making the world look correct. Here's a hero curtain simulation, large-scale cloth simulation. There were also a lot of beds in the film. We had to simulate a lot of blanket sheets, and also in some cases the mattresses and the pillows. And of course Sullivan's hair in the shot. This is a complex jacket simulation. The jacket is being removed from the shoulder, and the hair has to appear and react normally. All of the Roar characters' clothing is simulated, and we even simulated the zipper tabs on the BG backpack over in the corner over there. That's Pixar level attention to detail. This is more akin to loose garments and perhaps brave garments, where we are simulating a lot of cloth and on these monstery bodies, and in Art's case it's a complex case where we have loose cloth over his fur, and we're also taking care of Sullivan putting the hat on his head. I'm going to hand it over to JC now.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lighting Club. I'm Professor JC Kalash. Today we're going to talk about global illumination, basic foundation, and we're going to focus on technology we've developed to reduce lighting complexity on the show. But before I begin, I'd like to ask you, if you were to guess how many lights we've had on a typical traditional Pixar scene, how many lights would you guess? What would that number be? Take a wild guess. The average shot had upward of 300, 400, 500 lights. What we have here is lighting browser. These are like your web browsers, and they're a list of all the lights and their components in a typical scene. And when you first load your shot and you see that many lights, it's obviously not too appealing to just read these lights. So you would like to do is look at a 3D version of these lights. So you load this shot. This is a daycare shot from Toy Story 3. You have the kids playing in the daycare. We know there's windows here, so there should be sun coming in. But when you load your lights, you get this. And it's a little bit intimidating, so you try to look at it from different angles, and it doesn't get any better. The problem is, over the years, we've asked, as lighters, for so much artistic control, and we've gotten everything we wished for, that it created an unprecedented complexity. We were able to achieve pretty much anything we wanted to, but the complexity was exponentially increased. So what I'd like to show you today is ways and technology we've developed to reduce the complexity. So the first thing we did is we created some smart lights, or smarter lights. We created 6 new lights, and the idea behind these lights is they just work. You just move them, you get the proper shadows, you get the proper highlights, the softness and everything. You, the artist, don't need to engineer them. Imagine if you had a camera, and every time you took a picture, you had to assemble the camera. That's the world we lived in. It was very powerful. We could do whatever we want to the camera, assemble in different ways, but it was time-consuming and created unnecessary complexity. We didn't stop at just simple lights like these. We went after sky models, and we went after window lights or window models. These worked out of the box. They were physically correct. The next thing we did is global illumination, and we hear that term quite a bit. But what exactly is global illumination? If we were in a CG scene and we have a couple of objects, a red wall, green wall, a couple of other neutral walls, and we put a light in the ceiling, that's what we get. It's not too appealing because there's a lot of blacks. Because in reality, when light leaves the source, it hits an object and it bounces back. It never stops. If you stop for a second, think of a moonlight. Moonlight is not a light source. It's a light that leaves the sun, hits the moon, and bounces back and shines on the earth. So what we wanted is a system that automatically created these bounces. We didn't want the lighter to go in and put a red light here and a green light. We wanted the system to look at objects and realize that objects can be light sources too. And we didn't want to stop at one bounce. We wanted the system to allow us to bounce however many rays we needed for more visual complexity. That's cool, but the very first question everyone in the community asks, can you cheat that? Because we are at the core artists and we're doing cartoons, and physicality is not always necessarily the right answer. We want to cheat it. So we did a quick prototype and came up with a hybrid system, and in this case we're just proving that we can make a red wall bounce green light, and we can make a green wall bounce a red light. At the end of the day, we pleased the community by giving them a hybrid system, physically based and very simple, but also we kept the controls if we wanted to dissect it and tweak reality. Here's some early examples. We took a kitchen from Toy Story 3, we put a sunlight, we put a skylight, and that's the extent of the visual richness you get until you turn on global illumination and you start filling in all these dark areas. Here's the contribution of global illumination by itself. It's subtle, but it adds quite a bit to the scene. So here's some shots from the movie itself. Here's the campus shot, the bridge, the trees, they look appealing, but when you turn on global illumination, it's a much richer world. And we didn't spare anything with global illumination. We used it on hair, on grass, on trees, on bricks, water. Everything was receiving global illumination. Hence the reason why our render times were pretty high. Here's an interior scene without and with the lighting bouncing from everything. And then finally, here's a campus shot, and here's the effect of global illumination. It's a lot more positive in this case, and we would have to put a lot more manual lights just to create this effect. We also didn't want to stop at global illumination smart lights. Our lighters are artists, and we wanted them to focus on their skills. In the past, we've all turned into engineers because we're assembling all these lights together. Now we wanted them to be more painters-like. So, and most of them do have an art background. So the first thing we started playing with is this idea of painting on lights. You can paint shapes, you can paint whatever you want on light, and start producing some really interesting patterns to, again, pursue this richness we're after. And we didn't stop at simple lights like these. We created these sphere lights that allowed you to put brush strokes of dabs of colors of blue, red, and green, and create a fairly complex lighting on the character with a lot of shaping. Now, on the surface, this is one light that the lighter is working with, but every single pixel coming from this light is a light source. So there's hundreds, and if not thousands and millions of light sources contributing just to this simple lighting right here. But on the surface, the user has one light to deal with. Here's an example of lighting a tree, an exterior tree with painting with lights. And then one of the advantages of making this technology nice and simple is we're able to export it to departments upstream of lighting. One of the biggest problems with CG in general, it's a lot more linear than live action. So in live action, lighting and acting, everything happens at the same time. In computer graphics, it's more linear. So this technology, at the end of the day, has helped us provide, because it's much simpler, these lighting scenarios that were never used in the movie to these departments way before lighting. And they, for the first time, were able to see how their work fit in the scene, whether there were problems or not. They were able to fix them way ahead of lighting. Most of these setups we refer to as previs lighting. They usually took 1 to 2 days to implement, and we, like I said, we exported them to the departments upstream of lighting. We did the same thing also with the character department, and we did a minor change here. The sphere lights that we were painting, instead of just painting them, we went out, captured photographs, and the same technology applies. We can take a photograph, map it to a sphere, and turn it into a light source. And here again, every pixel in the sky, on the ground, becomes a light source. It's one physical sphere, but the contribution of it is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of light sources contributing. And the reason we did that is we allowed the character department for the first time to look at their characters in different lighting environments, overcast, sunny, interior, bright interior, and be able to stress test their characters way before they gave them to lighting later in the pipeline. We did that with Sullivan, we did that with Mike, and all the other 500 characters on the show. So this technology has definitely paved the way for the first time to allow lighting to start beginning at earlier phases in the pipeline. In conclusion, we'd love to use it more on future shows and hopefully start lighting at layout, at camera time. And here's a quick photograph of the lighting team that contributed to this beautiful movie. Thank you very much. And we can open it up to questions.
5 minutes for any questions.
Okay.
So you talked about how some of these things were used for the first time on Monsters University. Were they developed specifically for it, or were they being developed for a number of years, and then you turned them on for Monsters University?
A little bit of both. So we've had global illumination in the past, but we had a lot of obstacles with it, and it was very limited. You could not use it on hair, you could not use it on grass, vegetation. It could only bounce once instead of multiple bounces, and it was very expensive, and we had to use it carefully. And on this show, we went nuts. We were like, let's turn it on everything and see where the obstacles were. And we had a lot of challenges and try to fix them along the way. And then obviously had to ask for render resources increase for the studio. So we've definitely pushed it to the next level. And it's a ray trace technology now, whereas in the past it wasn't.
So if you have sunlight and it bounces off something, you count that then as 2 lights then? Or
you can think of it, yes.
300 to 500 lights because the sunlight is bouncing all over the place?
Exactly. So your sunlight will hit the ground and bounces, and now that's a new light, and it will hit the wall and bounces. And you can control the number of bounces.
So in previous films, that's the lighter's job to kind of in his head figure out how the light bounces and place lights to do that job.
Analyze.
With global illumination, I mean, models that.
And you can imagine, like, it can get really complex. And on previous shows, if a character put their hand on Sanjay's shirt, we would attach a light to the hand so that as the hand approached, it just created a simulation bounce light. The organic objects were really hard to simulate global illumination, whereas now it just works.
Whereas now it just works. I mean, they make it seem so easy, right? So Other thing I wanted to note coming out of that clip, and I should have mentioned it going in, was that you heard a lot of background noise and white noise in there, and that's only because the room was so big, and they talked
very quietly,
much quieter than some of the other sessions, and it was in a bigger room, so the sound dissipated some more. But we had to really crank that up, and you might have heard some dips in the audio there. I was trying to pull out background noises as people would shift in their desks and things like that. So definitely. These are going to be a little bit have a little bit more of that background noise, but once you get into the clip and you adjust to like that difference, then it's no biggie. But the information was still relevant and really good, so we wanted to pass that along for sure. So, okay, let's talk about some more of the things out of that though. So, doubling the amount of computers to render the film with. Whew!
I know.
I mean, that is, it was already huge. So now they've doubled it, as they call their render farm, all the computers sitting in that room. And then 100 million computer hours to complete the rendering of the film. That's insane. 100 million. And obviously that's combining all of them, hours together. So I wanted to do some more math based on the numbers that they talked about.
Of course, you're the math guy.
Well, I'm not a math guy. I just like thinking of...
Well, I'm sorry, the analytical one.
Yes. So they said that each frame is 29 hours to render. So with each frame being 29 hours to render, and there are 24 frames in 1 second, each second of the film would take 29 days to render. So that's a little crazy in itself.
Right.
So each second... So and that was done, that would be all of these numbers, or if it were done on one computer. So 1 minute would take you. So extrapolate it out. 1 minute would take you 1,740 days, which if you put that into years is 4.75. So 4 3/4 years to render 1 minute on one computer of Monsters University. So and that wouldn't even. Like, if you wanted to do the whole movie, I mean, that's where they're talking about the hours and hours. But that 4.75 years wouldn't even factor in any corrections that you'd have to make or scene changes. That's amazing. 1 minute. Almost 5 years. Whoa!
I know, when you break it down like that, it's just like, oh my gosh.
Clearly, that's why they have to have so many computers.
It's like, how do they figure out what they need? It's such a science.
Brilliant minds that have been involved in growing with this for so long. I mean, it's amazing stuff.
It is amazing.
Amazing stuff. So I also wanted to chat about 1 second when they were talking about, and they didn't go into any more details about this, but I have a quiz for you. So when they were talking about the example of a red wall, and saying that they were going to bounce a green light off of it. Or they were saying there's a green wall and they wanted to see if global illumination could bounce red light off of it. Do you know why they used that as an example?
The green and the red?
Yes.
Is that because they're opposite on the colors, the color wheel, the color spectrum?
Yes, but do you know, that is the case. So if you look at a color wheel, and we're looking at one and pointing at it right here, green and red are opposite sides.
Right.
But do you know why? I mean, you know that they're on opposite sides. That's good. But why? Why would the green wall bounce red?
You tell me.
So I'm going back to my art days here in school, because whenever a color bounces a shadow, the shadow will contain, and this blows my mind. See, like, this is the stuff that, like, in school I was like, are you kidding me? The shadow bounces the color across from it on the color wheel. So it won't be blatant. Like, if you see, like, a red wall, it won't bounce bright green. But the shadow will have green undertones. And if you've got a yellow wall, it's going to bounce a purple shadow. It blows my mind. So whatever's across from it, you got a blue wall, it's going to bounce orange. You just had to know that when you were doing drawing, painting, all those kind of things, to mix in some of those colors. But how does that happen?
Interesting.
How does that happen?
I don't know.
How does it bounce the color on the opposite side of the color wheel?
You better phone JC and ask him.
I know, it blows my mind. So I was excited when they were talking about that, because they didn't bring it up, but I knew what it meant. So I was excited about that.
You would have really enjoed his talk.
I would have enjoyed all of it.
I know you would have, but he they all speak with such passion, but he spoke with such technical wisdom about global illumination.
Smart guys.
Yeah.
And all of them, they're all smart. I mean, obviously, that's just from Sanjay's point of view, because he was the one that did that portion of the discussion. But yeah, obviously nothing with JC for Jean-Claude or for against Christine. They're obviously smart in their own rights.
Right.
Christine's talking about simulation and all. And,
woo! Yeah, it was really interesting to see. Like I mean, I've said it, I think, in all of our series, but I wish I could show you the pictures. That they were showing us on the screen from my mental brain images.
Right.
It was really interesting.
Mental brain images.
Yes, mental brain images.
So I also thought it was really cool how they described, and I think this is what you're talking about with, before they heard the clip, talking about, I can't believe they're telling us all this, is, that with the old system with lighting, they had to physically build the light. Like they talked about every time you build, if you took a picture as a photographer, you'd have to build the camera, then take the picture.
Right.
They had to build the light, then tell the light what to do. Now they can just tell the light what to do, and the system will, take control. Enhance and take control to a point. But I also thought it was cool that they said that, although the system is doing this automatically to some element, after they tell it where to go, it still has full manual control. So if they need to take over it, they can, take it off autopilot and retake control. Mm-hmm. But what this also inspired me to do is months and months and months ago, probably over a year ago or close to a year ago at this point, there was a technical document from Pixar that was released that talked about global illumination for them. But people caught on to the screenshots, and they were like, whoa, this is our unseen screenshots from Monsters University. But it made me want to go back and read that. And I went in thinking, oh, man, I got this. I'm going to read this. I'm going to get all this great information. Technical overload. Yes. I had to spend so much time looking up terms and all that, because again, we're not in the industry, the animation industry, so we don't know, or even movie making industry, so we don't know a lot of this stuff. So I want to talk about just a couple things from that article, just the amount of technical stuff that's in there. So the document, ready for the full name, is Multi-Resolution Radiosity Caching for Efficient Preview and Final Quality Global Illumination in Movies. yeah, exactly.
What?
So that's a mouthful. So the things I wanted to talk about, because we hear Monsters University, we hear global illumination. It makes it sound like Pixar invented global illumination.
Right.
They didn't. So what we want to talk about is that they just expanded on the system of research over years and years and years of film development, of animation development, and things like that. So they talk about in this technical document that the first movie, the first full-length feature movie, or yeah, I could say movie, that was created using this was... Take a guess.
Brave?
No. Back even further. This blew my mind too. Shrek 2.
Oh.
So that kind of blew my mind. And that, again, full length. So they had done it in other special effects for movies, but it was the first full length movie that it was done with. But it's obviously, even since then, global illumination has come a million miles. So it's a faster output, global illumination, with less noise. And how does that happen? It's a multi-pass system. So after you look at the lights, the system analyzes it. The first pass looks directly, and I'm going to get technical here just because I want to get some of this out there, and this is the last big part. It talks directly about illuminated micropolygons. The second pass looks at bounces of light, and the third looks at indirect illumination. So that's where the global element comes in. Before they would have this one master light that would come in, and then they would have to program the bounce light, and they'd have to do all these other things. But now the master light comes in, the system looks at it and says, okay, it's going to bounce here. Then it's going to take a third pass and look at, how some more of those indirect illuminations based on that bounce are going to happen. So then the document takes all these twists and turns, and it gets into really detailed items about how the memory is cached and how data is broken down into patches based on where the light is coming from in the scene. So essentially, the more important lights get a better patch, which means a higher resolution, and that gets a higher weighting. It's amazing that somebody thought of this, that they could program it. Blows my mind. Blows my mind.
It's also interesting that you say that Shrek 2 was the first film to use global illumination, when that's a completely different studio. And I think a lot of people, just like you said, they hear global illumination because it's been talked about so much because of Monsters University. Yeah, that it's a Pixar thing. It's a Pixar thing. Well, obviously Shrek 2 is not a Pixar thing.
Right. Exactly. So it was
that's actually really interesting to me.
Right, and the technical document is great. We're going to post a link to it in our show notes. Again, just go to our website, pixarpost.com, click on the podcast button, episode 13, it'll be in that list. So it's really cool how they go into this, and they talk about all of the other, if you want to learn, they even reference it. It's a huge, bibliography at the end that talks about, if you want to read about this, if you want to talk about the history of global illumination, if you want to talk about the history of film illumination, radiosity, ray streak. It's amazing stuff. I thought I was going to go into this. It seems like a relatively small document. No, don't plan less than an hour to 2 if you really want to dig into this, if you don't know what they're talking about. So it was amazing stuff. So anyways, let's move on right from there.
Yes.
Because I just had to get that out because I was so geeked reading all that stuff. It's just I wish that I could just spend my time in Pixar, gathering all as much information as I can and trying to pass as much on as I can. It's just crazy stuff. You
love your lighting, that's for sure.
Well, and details.
Yes.
The more detail that I can have, the happier I am. So, okay, the next thing that you experienced, or it's not really the next you experienced, but the next we're going to talk about in this series, was actually your last roundtable of the day 2, and that was with producer Kori Rae. Mm-hmm. So was this just in a regular conference room again?
Yeah, it was an upstairs conference room, the same kind of one that I was sitting in with Dan Scanlon. We sat in the same room, and they came to us for the 3 roundtables.
Yep. And so we actually cut quite a bit out of this. The original audio was close to 20 minutes, about 18. We actually cut it about in half, so it's about 9 minutes. But it was because we took out the questions that were essentially answered in some of the previous sessions that you've already listened to. So we didn't want to just rehash those, so we really tried to clean them up. But we'll talk a little bit more after the clip. Enjoy.
Was there an iteration where we see Mike and Sully's parents, or were they always consciously left off the table?
No, we definitely explored that. We explored it in many ways and many different, age at each of their ages. And what we kept coming back to was it took so much time, and it was that we were losing out on their relationship once they met, both separately and then when they met. And so we finally we just kind of kept leaning towards where we ended up. But we did many iterations with both sets of parents. Yeah.
How big was the crew?
The crew changes over the course of the 4 years that the film is in production, but at its peak, we were about 270 people on the crew here.
This is your first feature film where you're the producer, right? You've produced some shorts, executive produced. Talk to us a little bit about that role and how it's different than previous roles you've had.
Yeah, so I produced commercials and then started on production management, managing the animation department, and then production manager on Monsters, Inc. and associate producer on that film as well, and Incredibles. And so, but certainly the producer is exponentially more challenging, and there's more involved because the buck stops with you. So it's I got to learn how to to deal with talent. And do all work on all the casting. So there's a lot more elements to the role. The production stuff and experience I had, but then there's all of the marketing and the consumer products, everything that kind of relates to the film outside of the actual production is also the responsibility of the producer. And so that was all new to me and really great to.
Do you have to sign off when they ask for double the computing power?
That's it's a be with the executive team kind of. It's a co-signing, if you will.
Making a call like that or making a decision like.
It's a discussion about what the show needs and what the studio needs. We needed more rendering power to use the new lighting tools that we implemented on the film. The studio needed more rendering power as well, just to make sure that all of the films that were coming into production had their needs met. And so it was a negotiation and a decision. It was a studio-wide decision. It wasn't just for the film.
In terms of dealing with the talent, did you have a hand in terms of getting Helen Mirren on board?
only in so much as as setting up a meeting with her, and she wanted to come here to meet and find out about the movie and talk with John and Dan about it and everything. So in that way, yeah. But as soon as we had the character designed and the story character description kind of nailed down, she was definitely at the top of our list, of Dan's list creatively, of an incredible talent that we only hoped at that time that we could get. So it was a huge boon for us, and she's just amazing.
But at the same time, you have to take this, this Oscar-winning actor in a room and say, "We're taking you for you. When we made this, this horrible-looking creature, you were the person we thought."
That's true. But she thought Hardscrabble was amazing at character design. But really, it was when we talked to her about who the character was that she really thought that was great. That she was this powerful, legend of a scarer, and that she was the dean of the whole scaring program at this very prestigious school, and so she really took to it and was thrilled to take on that role. So
conversely, though,
yeah.
Again, Billy Crystal's the one who basically drives the story of this movie. How did you go about finding the little Billy Crystal? For the, again, that energy,
That was hard.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard, and finding really good child actors is difficult, especially in this medium where they have. Adult actors find it difficult because they don't have anybody to play against, and they're in a room by themselves, and they're reading dialogue. But it was especially difficult to find. We went to New York. We went all over trying to find someone who had that little edge, that gumption of a young Billy Crystal, and so it was a long search. But we found him, Noah Johnston. We think he's great. We think he pulls it off, and Dan worked with him really hard to kind of get that, just even how quickly he speaks as a young kid. Most kids that young don't. He's just got it going on. He's talking to all of those kids on the playground, and so anyhow, so he was a good find. It took a while though.
So were Billy and John on board from the beginning, or did you have to do any convincing for them to come back?
No, and they were on board from the beginning. And in fact, I think Billy had been asking John, when can I be Mike Wazowski again?
Really?
Yeah, he loves this character. He I think even in an interview he stated that it's the favorite character he's ever portrayed or played. So he's really, really fantastic, and he is Mike Wazowski in every sense. So they were both thrilled to come back.
John Ratzenberg pops up in every movie you guys make. Is there literally a John Ratzenberg meeting? As in, it's like,
there's not. It's it really is. We want to, kind of keep that good luck charm going, but it's not something we think about within the story. It comes up organically and sometimes it's early in the process of the story when we're like, oh, that'd be great. We can pull John in for that. Other times it's later in the process where we haven't figured it all out yet, and we come back and we're like, oh, what would be great, but it usually it magically works out somehow that there is a great role, but there's no big meeting that happens. It really does happen within the show organically. John and Pete didn't even know for a while where we were going to use them, and so it was a surprise to them. It was kind of fun, but yeah, it works out.
Talk about working with Pete on this and what he was able to contribute in revisiting himself and possibly even, revising.
Right. Pete was so great, and he's so generous with his time and his energy. So he was very involved, especially at the beginning, and he would come to our story sessions and sit in and. When we wanted him to, and when we needed him there to kind of guide. And then he was, throughout the film, he was there for Dan as a resource. They had lunch every week. They would talk about the film. He was a touchstone, and anytime we felt like we were at a place where we wanted to run something by him. I mean, it would come up sometimes in character design or even set design. We would want to run stuff by him just to make sure that we were getting it right, that these characters and the sets and the environments were all in the world and fitting in the world properly. And so he gave us some really great guidance up front, and then we were off. But he trusted Dan so much, and he trusted the team so much that he was never worried or never. He was just excited and generous, and would help when we needed him to and wanted him to.
Pete Docter, just a man of mystery. I mean, how cool would it be to be on a movie? You can work side by side with him. You can conference with him. Well, not side by side, but you conference him. You bring him in for all these discussions to make sure that continuity's there, that story's going the right way.
Right.
Awesome.
I know.
And one of the things right at the beginning of this was really cool was the question that fellow Pixar site Greg Mariotti from Pixar Talk talked about was, about the discussions were Mike and Sully's parents considered to be brought into this film, and how she talked about that there were so many iterations and those kind of things. Really cool to think how long they probably discussed that and thought about it, because I could see them thinking, hey, let's bring it in,
right?
We're going to be going back to college days, let's talk about that. Let's see them getting off to college. I'm sure they thought about all that stuff back to youth, like really young elementary school, and then zap it all the way forward to dropping off at college.
Right. And I know the story changes so often, but to me, when I heard Kori answer that question, I know most of the other, I can't speak for everybody, but I wonder if most people were just like wondering about the story. For me, I was like obsessing about, oh my gosh, was their character development done on what Sully's parents look like and Mike's parents look like?
Ooh.
I mean, we kind of know, towards the end of Monsters, Inc., what Mike Wazowski's mom looks like. She's in the audience when they do their play, Put That Thing Back Where It Came From, or So Help Me.
Right.
So you kind of get what she would look like. But does Mike's dad look like that? Is he a one-eyed green monster too?
Right.
What do Sully's parents look like?
Right. We know.
So seriously, I kind of blanked out for like 5 minutes just thinking about, is there artwork in this studio hidden somewhere of what these characters could have or would have looked like?
I like it.
Was it scrapped from the beginning so early on that those concepts never even hit character development or hit
right, because story
paper and pen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I like it though.
Yeah,
that's a good thought. I'd love to see that.
Blanked out. I was like in my own little world for like 5 minutes.
Yeah. And the other thing I learned from this is I had no idea how many areas producers touch. I mean, consumer products and all the elements.
I know.
That's crazy. Even down to consumer products. I would have thought it would have been...
From the high down to like consumer products, you would think that wouldn't be too high on their list. I mean, they're making a movie.
Right.
Yeah, and yet she's hitting every single element of that movie.
Right. And then the other part that I was really glad that I was able to hear, because I remember as soon as you got out of day 2, you called me and told me about this point specifically, was the discussion where they talk about finding the young Mike Wazowski voice and how they had to travel all over the place and find somebody that could have that speed of speech and all those kind of things based on age and how difficult that was.
Well, at that point, you had not heard the young Mike Wazowski's voice.
Right.
And when I told you that it is perfect, I mean, I don't want to get into it too much. I know it's been in a trailer, a snippet of it, but oh my goodness. They could not have found a perfect voice actor. They could not have found a more perfect voice actor for this role.
It's a little Billy Crystal.
It really is. And just like she says, he speaks with such gumption and such innocence, but yet eagerness.
Right.
And it was so perfect.
And when they talk about that they went all over like New York and stuff, I want to know how all over and how long and how many people they had to go through. And did they get to like their wits' end, and were they like, oh, we're never going to find somebody?
Yeah, and then did Noah just walk in and they were like,
bingo,
done, this is him.
Yeah.
This is our young Mike Wazowski.
I really want to know that.
Right. Should have asked that. I'm so sorry.
Well, what are you going to do? So that part, really cool as well. The next part we're going to talk about, and we really had to condense this one because this one was held in the general atrium area, kind of in a corner. This is the snack time with Squishy, which is Peter Sohn, who voiced the character of Squishy. Mm-hmm. So it was in the corner.
Yeah, it was. It was in kind of like in like enclave or just a enclosure of the atrium.
Right.
It's really echoey.
Right.
There's a lot of people at this point. I mean, we're all there. So there was, 25 of us.
Right.
But, there's still people, actual animators and Pixarians who are getting snack and eating a late lunch on the opposite side of the atrium. So you can, hear banging and clanging. I mean, this is their daily life. But yeah, no, it was really interesting to see Peter Sohn in person.
Right.
I mean, as soon as we knew it was snack time with Squishy, I just ran, right? I did get a snack. I got my...
What did you snack on?
The most delicious cookie I've ever had in my life.
What kind of cookie?
It was a M&M cookie.
Okay.
And it was hot. I shouldn't say hot. It was warm.
The perfect temperature?
It was so... You guys might be laughing, but it was seriously the most delicious cookie I've ever had. I even told people that.
And was it just because...
I don't know if it's because I was hungry.
Because you were in Pixar and experiencing the day, it all enhanced the experience, like getting a sample at the store?
No, it was really good. And I'm not a cookie person, but it was good.
Moist in the center?
It was just good. I don't know to describe a cookie. It was good.
All right, fine.
But, no, I got my front row seat because I was really excited to hear him talk. And, I was already a huge fan of his work. I mean, Partly Cloudy is one of my favorite shorts, and just the whole story behind it, and knowing that he comes not from just an animation background, but a story background. And obviously, I mean, you love his voice. When you hear him talk, it's just like, oh my gosh.
I know.
Not only am I seeing a meal...
Right.
I'm just picturing a rat in front of me. But now I'm picturing Squishy, who I've just seen the previous day with his voice. He is captivating. I mean, I know I've said that about so many people at Pixar, but I cannot even describe...
Well, that's what makes them great storytellers.
I cannot even describe to you the amount of passion that everyone speaks with there.
Right.
It is so different than if someone came into my work, and I don't have that passion when I talk about accounting. But these people have such a passion, and they tell these...
You have to be able to ooze it if you're going to sell it. And they're not selling you.
Not selling it,
They're not selling you. But what they're doing is they're selling their story ideas. And he talks a little bit about that you have to try to, no matter what, you have to put your whole heart into it, that you have to pitch it and all these other kind of things. Well, before we get too far down that road of talking about it, let's let people listen.
To it.
It's about 5 minutes. Like I said, we had to cut it down quite a bit because of background noise. It was just really, really tough. So we did take the best moments from it, though, and be able to
share
let you guys hear those. So let's take a listen.
So I played Squishy. Well, let me talk about myself for a little bit. I've been here at Pixar for about 11 years. I can't believe that. And I've run the gamut. I started on Finding Nemo as a character designer, and like a prop designer and everything like that, and then moved into story, and then into animation on Incredibles, and I've bounced around doing a bunch of different stuff here, and now I got lucky enough to play Scott Squibbles for this movie, which I adore. I'm currently co-directing The Good Dinosaur with Bob Peterson. That's coming out 2014. And if you've got any questions, please shoot them in my face.
You have your own workload here at Pixar. When they decide, hey, we want to do this for us, how do they negotiate your schedule? And do they just pluck you, or is it something you have to work?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know what is great about this place is it's this kind of, it's a big family. Most every place you work is a big family, but what's funny about this place is that as a family, you kind of have to share knowing that you're going to get into those places down the road. And when they first asked me to do it, it was just scratch stuff. It's just, meaning scratch voice is the temporary voice, just to put in the reels, just to test out that characters. And so it takes a chunk of time, but you want to give it up because you know that down the line you're going to ask other people to come in onto your film to to give you that help. And it was just like, Peter, we think you might be funny for this voice. Just come on down and just give it 10 minutes now and then more time later. So you'll come down in the middle of whatever, you just schedule it properly, and you get down and you give it your all, and then you go back to work in your, whatever you're working on, and then the more time they request, the more it's just like, yes, of course, I'll do whatever. I'm here for whatever, because it's all in the name of making the best thing you can do. Yes.
Without being specific at all about anything, what are the types of things you're working on with Good Dinosaur at this point?
We are in full production right now. We are in the full gamut of, story fixes, animation, design, set building. It's just like we're in the middle of putting up the play. So it's just like, you've got to build that stage, you've got to do this, and we're recording still, and it's the high pressure stuff that's really fun and exciting.
Yeah. What did you learn about filmmaking from Partly Cloudy?
Putting your heart out there is a very interesting thing, because I had never put anything out that was out in a mass audience. It was a very personal story about my mother and I, and putting it out there. I've never told my mother that it was a personal story about her and I just never said that. Maybe I have to get to that point, but some of the things that you learn is the balance of what things to compromise on, what things, because it's always backwards of like, what could I have done better on that? What could I have done smoother, and it's a lot of that type of stuff. But the major overall thing is, do I put something out with my heart, and then if it is stomped on, do I close up and not do that again? But the big lesson was, I will always try to put my heart out there, no matter what, people or whatever it is. It's just, that's the only way that I get to learn about myself and appreciate the art form of, even though it was a small short, just telling a story in a way that is as clear as it can be, if that makes sense. But man, it is like, I've been a story guy here for a long time, and if I'm pitching a story to you guys of like, okay, Mr. Incredible has to go down here and he's gonna tell his wife that I have to do this by myself, and then feeling the crowd going, yeah, I'm not buying into this, and then Frozone comes in, and they're still not buying it, and I'm burning the story. No one's understanding what I've just pitched. But I have put my heart and soul into the work, and then it gets crushed, and everyone's like, no, you gotta do it like this, you gotta do it like this. And then there's the ego of like, okay, I didn't do right. But that's not the lesson. The lesson is, no. The film is the priority. Putting your heart into the work will always benefit the film, even if it is askew. The director's job is to go, no, that's not appropriate for this time. We will save that juice for this. Oh, okay, if you just said it like that, then I could be fine. No, but that was a big deal for me.
Totally cool. Like we were talking about before we even went into the clip, that's where he's talking about putting your whole heart into everything, no matter what. You got to give it your all. Totally inspirational, totally uplifting.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, how cool. I mean, like you said, I can't imagine if I was just talking with him. Like, let's just say you're out, getting lunch.
Yeah.
Peter Sohn walks in, you see him, and you're like, "Hey, Peter Sohn." For the first, if he said, "Let's sit down and just have some lunch," for the first couple, minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, I wouldn't be able to concentrate at all. I would just be listening to his voice and looking at him, being like, "That's a meal. Okay, that sounds like squishy." And like you said, you can't pull the two apart because he's not voice acting in the sense that he's putting on a voice. That is his voice.
Yeah.
Totally cool.
It's such a great voice, too.
I know. Totally unique.
I know.
Have you ever heard anybody like that?
And he's really animated when he talks. I mean, he's walking around. He's very engaging. It was, he talked for about a half hour. It was one of the quickest half hours of my life. It
Right.
went by really quick.
Right.
Maybe it was more like 45 minutes, but it went by super quick. And, I mean, you heard him answer questions about the Good Dinosaur. He was pretty much an open book.
Well,
I mean, he did not...
Well...
With his questions, you could ask him questions.
Right, you could ask him. He couldn't obviously answer everything.
But I just thought that was it was nice.
Yeah, and I thought it was really cool that he talks about, leading into the Good Dinosaur discussion, that he talks about how his voice acting that he's done has allowed him in his direction that he's getting into with Good Dinosaur to look at voice acting in a different way, which is totally going to allow him to connect on a different level with whomever he's directing.
Right, with the talent.
Yeah. I mean, that's invaluable that he's done so many things within Pixar, so that way he can experience all these things. And with the fact that he directed Partly Cloudy, the short, and the fact that he's co-directing The Good Dinosaur with Bob Peterson, I mean, how many more films is it going to take? We're going to see him directing a film. He will direct a feature.
Right.
I mean, that's just crazy. Totally cool. He's so seasoned, yet still so young. How are all these people doing all this stuff with their lives? And look at us. Totally cool. So, yeah, I mean, just engaging. I hate to say it again. We say it all the time. Engaging, endearing.
Very good. I would definitely say that, because especially when he talks about how he, it's from the heart. When they pitch stuff, when something gets shot down,
right?
It's all from the heart, and their family. It's just you felt that. I mean, I felt that sense of family,
right?
Through, everybody that we get the chance to sit down and listen to or speak with. That it was such a sense of community, and I think that's what really makes Pixar so wonderful, and why so many people have such a passion to want to pursue a career there, is that sense of community.
Sure. Now let's go from one endearing conversation and one endearing person to another.
Yes.
We're going to wrap up the series with a little bit of information in regards to The Blue Umbrella, again, the short that'll be opening ahead of Monsters University in theaters on June 21st. Saschka Unseld. So there are a few spoilers in this discussion, so if you don't want to hear this, skip ahead 14 minutes, because that's about how long the conversation is, but wait till we tell you that it's going to start. But again, if you do listen to it, you're going to hear some screams in the background. And again, that's like we talked about in the last episode when they were doing some of the scream testing, or what are they? The
screamometer.
The screamometer.
Yeah, it was right down.
So you'll
right
hear
outside.
So you hear some screaming in the background. Nobody's being harmed at Pixar. But yeah, we'll talk on the backside of this. But again, totally endearing, totally engaging. Just what a great guy.
Yeah.
So let's listen to this final one to wrap up part 3 of the Monsters University Press Day.
So when you thought about the Blue Umbrella, did you think about doing it as photorealistic backgrounds from the beginning?
Not really. And it's funny, it's during yesterday and today that I realized I actually never thought of it being photoreal initially. And I have never thought of that before, finally, until yesterday. The idea came just from the umbrella I found. And for a long time I worked on coming up with an idea or a story for an umbrella, and the first thing was someone had thrown the umbrella away and the umbrella tries to get back to its owner. Someone breaks up with you and you want to be with that person, and that person just threw you away. But I don't know, I could never come up with a happy ending to that story. And I worked on it for a long while like this, which of course has nothing to do with that it's photoreal or not. And then it was like half a year later or something like this, I started to think of the short more as being about the rain and being a love declaration to the rain, because where I grew up it rains much more than here, and I like the rain a lot. I love cities in the rain, so the rain turns the city into a magical place, and that's when the idea of city characters coming to life kind of mixed in, that not just the umbrellas come to life when it rains, but the whole city comes to life. So that was part of a coincidence of me exploring what story I want to tell in it, that it mixed in. And it wasn't until I actually pitched the story here. The story was kind of in the shape that it is the final film when I pitched it. But I pitched it just verbally with like 4 pictures to underscore certain story beats. And then after I pitched it, I showed a test I had done, which was at the time unrelated. At the time, I had an idea for a music video that a city sings a song, basically. So on my phone, I had just filmed a couple of faces I'd seen around my block, loaded them onto the computer, and animated to a song. So in the pitch, after I told the story, I said, by the way, when I said the city comes to life, I had this test I wanted to show you, just kind of to make people understand the idea of it and what I mean with it. Buildings don't jump up, it's just kind of like this. And everyone was always so... I could just see, I watched people watching this, and this moment of the first blink, I had exactly the same character as ended up in the final film being the first character that comes to life. I had in my test, that's like a block away from where I live. And there was this magic to the perception in the first 5 seconds being it's real, and then wondering what is going on there, and then this slow descent into, oh, this is alive. And that worked because it was photoreal. So it was kind of during that pitching process that I realized there is something unique about this thing, and we all started thinking, what if we do the whole thing photoreal? So it had nothing to do with the initial story idea, but it came during the process.
Why did you feel it necessary to have a happy ending?
I think there's a if it would be a European art house film, it probably wouldn't have. But ultimately I'm probably too much of a romantic to not have a happy ending. I always had these evil thoughts in the back of my head that if we show it at some more art house festival, I'll just cut off the end and it ends when Blue is there on the side of the street, and then I cut the end credits to it. But it's the movies, and I feel like you want to make people happy, and I want to give people a good feeling when they go out of a movie and see something, and there's enough kind of reality out there is hard enough sometimes already. And I think what you do in a film is you bring the character there, you bring the story to the harsh reality, but you end on a positive note of hope and a good outlook on life, and not a negative outlook. The important thing is just that at one point you go to the harsh reality that sometimes happens, and that's what it does in the middle when the umbrella is on the ground, and it's nearly exactly the same thing I saw that one day, but then you go back to happy.
Obviously your music is a very important part of this. Who did the music?
It was a kind of collaboration from me, the test I talked earlier about that I had done on my iPhone, where I thought it would be a music video. That was a song from Sarah Jaffe, who's the vocalist in the final piece. So her voice had been with me since the very beginning, even before I had the story. And but she's a singer-songwriter. She's I don't know why she's so unknown, but she's a small singer-songwriter from Denton in Texas. And singer-songwriters do a bit of different thing than composers, because the song is 3-4 minutes long and has one mood and one idea, while the score needs to change kind of mood and rhythm on a dime. So we wanted a composer composing the music, but her being the vocalist. And that ended up being John Bryan, who I love for just the stuff he did on Punch Drunk Love and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And he's such a light tone, but such catchy melodies. So he scored the whole thing, and Sarah Jaffe is the vocalist. But I don't know, for me it's nearly like a karma thing that her voice inspired the idea for making a music video with city faces, because I was walking around listening to her through the city, and her being the final voice in the film. Somehow there's a simplicity to it that I really like.
You mentioned last night that it was hard to do the human faces, and so you avoided that. What was sort of the easier part to make look real, and what are some things you did to make things look more real as well?
The easier parts to make look real. Good question. I think initially everyone thought the first shots should be easy, but then they ended up not being that easy because you can see everything in broad daylight. We had a lot of things actually working in our favor to make it look real. First on, that it's night helps a lot. It just, so much stuff is in darkness. That it rains helps a lot because it adds just a certain amount of complexity and detail that if it wouldn't rain you wouldn't get, and you would look more at all the details of the buildings. And then something I was really interested in, using a really shallow depth of field, because for me there's a beauty in it. And that, of course, blurs out the whole background, so you don't have to build the city into infinity. So there were a couple of things that really worked in our favor. Without those, we wouldn't have been able to do it. But for me, it was about the depth of field stuff. We didn't add it because it's easier that way. It was something I really wanted to explore because I think there's the reality in the beginning where everything is kind of evenly lit and daylight. And then it stays photoreal throughout, but I think there's so many elements of filmmaking that you can use to make something very expressionistic and very kind of lyrical. And even though you're photoreal, I wanted it to be more artistic and more bold than normally animated movies are. And I think out-of-focus backgrounds do that. I think they're nearly painterly with just some red splotch or blue splotch and something like this. And the same thing with the neon lights, that it's so boldly lit. Some shots are just green or red or blue. These kind of things I found really important to kind of make that place magical, even though it's real.
Tell us about your pitch process, because I can only imagine how scary that must be to sit there with the brain trust and pitch. Do they let you do your spiel and then they give you ideas right then and there, or while you're giving it, do they say, well, wait a minute, what about?
That would have been weird, I think. So, the pitch was strange because I directed shorts before. I worked in animation for a while, so all that stuff I was used to, but pitching something, I had done talks on technical things and all these kind of things, so I was used to giving a talk, but telling an emotional story just with words, was something I've never done. I don't work in the story department, I work in the cinematography department, and we have visual things to show. And that was the one part I was really kind of not scared by, but maybe a bit scared by. But what I did then, because I realized, well, I'm not good at this. Like the first tries to development, I realized I'm not really good at this. So I pre-wrote the whole thing, and in the way I would talk, like not weirdly scripted, but in natural language. And I recorded myself on my computer, pitching into my computer. I was alone at home, and I watched it. And it was really embarrassing, and it was a very intimate moment to be that kind of honest with yourself. But I did that like 50 times. And at one point I was like, I still kind of look like I'm mumbling, and somehow I'm not really as emotional and expressive as I imagine Pixar people to be. So I thought, I'm just by myself at home. How about I just act really silly and really over the top and push it to 200% because no one is watching me. And I think I wouldn't have been able to do that like in a workshop where you try to improve that because people would have been watching me. So I did that and then watched myself and realized, it's kind of just slightly stronger than before. It just in my head I'm crazy, but if I look at the video, it's like a bit better, but not even as much as I thought it should be. So that helped a lot. And then when I gave the actual pitch first to a panel of the main directors here and heads of story, and then later to John, it was amazing because they're amazing listeners. It made such a big difference test pitching to just people here I knew or some people in development and stuff like this who do this a lot. But pitching to the panel or to John was amazing because I could see how they were listening. Like they were not sitting there like this and listening, they were sitting there like this and watching me and following what I was talking about and emotionally following me. And that, like, suddenly there was this additional energy I had from this, which was amazing. And then, they let me pitch the whole thing. I showed the tests, and then afterwards they talked about it. But even during the pitch, I could see in their faces that were following me. Like the worst thing is you tell someone and everyone's like poker face, and you don't even know, and then you spin out of control. So that was amazing. The how actively they listened and nearly became part of me telling the story.
What was their best note?
The best note? It was funny because there were never any story notes. It was always kind of everyone instantly dived into how fantastic it would be to have this world of umbrellas. And initially we thought maybe we have baby umbrellas, and we have kind of loads of different characters there that later on we removed because we didn't want to show the humans, but we wanted to have a contrast between people who hate the rain and someone who loves the rain. So the people who hate the rain became the other umbrellas. But we had it kind of just, it was relatively straightforward. We didn't have any story changes during the pitch process, so there were barely any notes in regards to that. During the story process, though, there was one great note which wasn't part of my pitch, and that's the nice thing about working so much on the story than here, was that the city should help Blue at one point. That wasn't part of my initial pitch. They were just watching him and kind of knowing him, but they couldn't do anything.
That was part of your test, though, wasn't it?
My test was just the city singing. Actually, my pitch was the city being a Greek chorus. So the city was actually singing and changing its song when they meet into a love song, and when they get separated, the song would change. So the city was always just a Greek chorus, but they were sitting in the back seat. And then during the story process, we were like, they should do something. Otherwise, I mean, apart from it maybe being creepy, it's kind of, you're like, do something. And then we needed to figure out ways how they could believably do something.
Cool. I mean, obviously we had, with the interview that we were lucky enough to get with Saschka before the Blue Umbrella even came out. Before it came out. Of course, before it came out. It was months ago. It was, March?
Back in March.
Yeah. So I love hearing a couple of those elements that we didn't necessarily talk to him about or read about in other articles. So we talk about, or he talks about, that the whole process came about so naturally and organically. Like it was almost accidental. Like it almost just happened. Like one day he's like, there's an umbrella, and there's the story idea, and I'm going to do this test animation. And then that test animation that he does is the first character in the short. It just totally crazy how that whole process from the story to the everything, how it just evolved. But the part that I really loved, and when I talked about being endearing, not only his vocal pacing, because of his German background and that, but I love the fact of what makes him endearing, how he really got into his pitch process and that discussion of how he pitched it to himself. I think he said like 50 times.
Right.
I mean, just how he had to convince himself when he was recording himself, and how it's a personal moment watching yourself, and how he had to say, okay.
It was really real.
Right.
Because I've done that.
Right.
I've done that with, countless things. You just look at yourself in the mirror, and it's just like, when you talk, in a mirror at yourself, it is...
Yeah, you sound silly.
Yeah. You're just kind of like looking at yourself being like, oh my gosh.
Right.
That's
and especially
really,
when you
what?
record it, though.
Yeah.
Because then you're watching it externally of just looking at yourself straight in the eye.
Right. So that was really interesting point.
Yeah. Yeah, so he had to talk about that he had to get himself ramped up, like he was going to go 200%. But I could see him over-analyzing this for sure. First off, he comes from a technical background.
Right.
Second off, he's thinking that he's the first non-story guy that has pitched a story and has gotten it approved, or he's thinking, I don't know if it's going to get approved. But he's going in there thinking, I'm this technical kind of like quiet guy that, is more introspective, and not saying that they're not introspective, but probably how he's interpreting himself, or at least how I would interpret myself. But he's got to go in front of the brain trust, and all of a sudden now he's got to ramp it up because he's got to be like those other energetic story guys, and he's got to talk like them, and he's got to get him excited about the Blue Umbrella.
Right.
It's just like, I could see him doing that and thinking that he's got to do that, but then, reeling it back a little bit and just talking.
He does kind of seem like such like kind of a quiet, reserved, humble guy.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, that's my last note that I wrote of my notes. That's the last word I wrote. I said, so honest, so humble.
Yes.
That's crazy. Yeah. So, it's just really cool that he opened up and allowed that little element. And that's something that, if you're not a first-time director, you would never get that in a discussion, because now they've pitched the second time.
Right.
They've experienced it twice. Their experiences are different. How they reflect on it is different. It's amazing that those emotions, that he can still bring that up after talking about this so many times and still be so real about it. So really cool. All right, well, that about wraps up part 3 of the Monsters University Press Day event. Be sure to tune in next week as we announce a whole bunch of cool stuff. We're going to talk with Dan Scanlon. Hopefully we'll be able to talk with Dan Scanlon after we go to the Monsters University charity event. We're going to be announcing a contest next week, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to be introducing a new segment. There's so many new things coming up, so definitely stay tuned. Just because part 3 is over doesn't mean we haven't thought of something else.
We have so many exciting things coming up for this year, this next month. Oh my gosh.
But forget about that far. We're just talking about the next podcast.
Yes, the next podcast.
So really cool.
Big things.
Anyways, that about wraps up episode 13 of the Pixar Post Podcast. As usual, I'm TJ.
And I'm Julie.
And be sure to stay tuned to PixarPost.com all week for the latest Pixar news.